Hello, Sean. Welcome to the podcast.
Hello, Chris. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Today's guest is artist Sean Michael Chavez, and he's a native of New Mexico and a graduate of Southwest University of Visual Arts. His award-winning artwork has been featured in publications, he has had successful solo exhibitions, and his work is sought after by both corporate and private collectors. And before we start, Sean, where can people see your work?
Year-round at Acosta Strong Fine Art. That's located in Santa Fe, and we like to call it the first and last stop on Canyon Road. That's at 200 Canyon Road, in case you're wondering. And then for other times of the year, I do participate in a few museum shows. Been lucky enough to be accepted to those, which include a show at the National Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum in Oklahoma City, Coors Western Art, which takes place in Denver, Colorado. And I also participate in a fundraising show for the Albuquerque Museum. And I'm looking to add a few more of those as time goes on. But if you're looking at any time of the year, I would definitely Acosta Strong Fine Art first thing.
Fantastic. And listeners, connect with Sean, and I appreciate if you hit the subscribe and like button for our show. When I'm combing artists' work on the internet, and I come across art that is eye-catching and makes me see a particular subject in a unique way, I'm immediately intrigued. And Sean, the way you capture and express your art does that. The way you paint, your choice of colors. Please tell me how you found your love for Southwest art as a subject matter.
I really appreciate those kind words. As far as finding the subject matter, that kind of trees for the forest kind of thing, or trees for the forest, however that goes. Basically, this is the kind of place where I grew up, and it took a long time for me to really see it and recognize it and appreciate it. So it was something that I think just maturity and starting to maybe move beyond some of the naivety that I had about the place that I was living and just embrace it and understand the value that the surroundings in this place that I live in offers.
It's funny that you say that, because sometimes when you're just driving through a city or a state, you may not capture that. But if I understand you right, growing up, you didn't really see the essence of New Mexico until you stopped and actually looked around deeper. Am I correct there?
I think as I just became older and sort of maybe stopped trying to focus so much on just youthfulness, I guess as a young kid, I was a skateboarder and kind of into the urban environment and being cool, and didn't really necessarily see the West for what it really is, which is, our heritage. There's so much richness within it. It's our history, it's our families. It's every bit of us in terms of eating from it, from the land and living within it. And it's just moving beyond youth allowed me to finally open my eyes and see that.
I wanted to mention, I love all your pieces, but I particularly love your piece titled Paciencia. I hope I'm saying that right. I just love the way you painted this night scene, the color combinations you use, and the one-point perspective of the man sitting is just executed perfectly. Can you talk about your particular approach when you start a painting? Like, what do you choose as a scene to paint? Is there an overall feeling you're trying to convey in your pieces?
I do think that upon any painting, really, I do have an intention somewhere back there. In terms of how I get to the end result is varied. I don't know if you saw in my bio that I do have a background in graphic arts and design. Spent at least 20 years working in that environment. And so, I sort of do take that approach that I have an end goal that I need to meet. And sometimes that requires some thumbnails first. Sometimes I'll jump right into a refined drawing, or maybe just some paint on canvas, or all of those. Full spectrum of the development. It just kind of depends on how developed that idea is and how hard ultimately that idea is going to be to execute in the end, and how much is required in between there. But I do generally have a vision. It's like, I want to do a nocturne. In this case with Paciencia, that's a gentleman that actually owns a shop in Santa Fe who's been very generous, both in terms of just his time and his friendship and some of the resources that, that's him, really. That's a picture of him with his gear sitting in front of his shop, actually. And a lot of the elements around it and the feeling of it, of course, is a little bit more of a fantasy. That's not really what happened at that moment. But in that case, basically, that happens to be from a photograph. Sometimes it's taking that photograph and seriously manipulating it in terms of adding or subtracting elements and creating an environment that I'm looking for within the painting itself.
So your references are photography. You stage the setting. So you take a lot of photos and then you use that as references for your paintings?
Sometimes yes, sometimes no. It really just depends on how I need to meet that goal. I sort of like to put myself in feedback loops as well and sort of reference my own paintings, because I feel like then it starts to become amplified, whatever that style is or whatever that subject is that I'm working on. If I'm continuing to sort of reference myself, I start to feel like that there starts to be a punctuation mark in there that starts to get noticed, not just myself, but others start to see it. It's an accent that is, whether you can really define what that accent is or not, it's at least a feeling. It's kind of like reading typography, where you aren't necessarily aware of that feeling that font, that lettering might be giving you, but throughout a series of paintings, you can still get a sense that there's something, a je ne sais quoi in there somewhere.
And for the listeners out there, I urge you to really look at his work, because the color combinations that he uses it just captures a feeling when you're looking at Sean's work. Was there an evolution to your art to get to those colors, or was there a lot of trial and error? Because the colors you choose are particularly unique and give a sense of a feeling when I look at your pieces.
Appreciate that. Thank you so much. Yeah, it's funny that color, I mean, I guess it shouldn't be so much, but to me it is funny that color really seems to be an element of my paintings that people are drawn to. One of the first things that they mention is the color. And to me, those colors are ubiquitous with the desert. I don't know what it is that whether other people are seeing and necessarily why turquoise or oranges or yellows, these really intense hues, are so related to the desert. I guess I'm not necessarily looking at the culture or the clothing that are associated with that environment, but really I'm looking at the environment itself. And when I look out into the mesas, I see these very subtle hues of sage and yellow and greens, almost a lot of grays, really. And I also like to paint in grays too, because I feel that it's a little bit more challenging because you're really working within a closed space rather than having a full spectrum of black to white. For instance, you're only working from maybe a 30% white to a 70% gray, and trying to still solve problems within that limited range of value or color.
I also see that you had your work featured on the inaugural opening of Santa Fe's Acosta Strong Fine Art, where your work was completely sold out. And for artists who would love to one day have a solo exhibition, can you tell us how this opportunity came about?
Yeah, for sure. Where do you begin with that one?
Well, let me jump in here. I think a lot of artists still want to have like gallery representation or have a solo exhibition, and they just don't know how to even get started with something like that. How do you get the opportunity to walk through the door, so to speak?
Obviously, there's no one path, and I think that probably every artist that is showing in a gallery is going to tell you a different story about how they got there. Number one, it's got to be the work. You have to be, whether you're painting or drawing or pastel or sculpting or whatever it is, you have to be putting in that work to be able to show that gallery. For me, I think I did state earlier that I've been with it. This is my third year with Acosta Strong, which is amazing. The reverse 3 years ago, I had a plan to get my portfolio together and approach Acosta Strong with that portfolio. And with some sort of stroke of luck, I accidentally friended Carlos Acosta, who is the owner of the gallery, friended him on Facebook, and he got back to me within about 15 minutes and saying, "Hey, I really like your work." And, nervously, I was like, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe I didn't update my website page. That I just did this I was like, I know that's the owner of the gallery, so I must follow him." And I wasn't really prepared for him to get back to me so quickly and everything. And my plan was that within a year from that moment that I would be approaching him with work. And so I feel like I'm really actually a whole year ahead of where I had planned on being, which is amazing. But I just jumped on that opportunity and said, "Hey, would you like to meet up and see my work?" And he said, "Yes, I'd love to." I think we met within that week. I left paintings there that day. And it's been a really magical relationship from there. I couldn't ask for more in terms of how much galleries offered me and how much I'm learning gallery. But in my case, it was doing and having some work available, a little bit of luck, and a lot of intention. I'd been frequenting that gallery for more than a year with the anticipation that when the time came that I would be approaching that gallery first. And so there's a little bit of a symbiosis there, some sort of magic basically that allowed things to actually work out like they had. It was my target gallery, and it happened a year earlier than I expected.
Now, I guess you can never really answer this question until you actually have the event, but did you have any confidence that you were going to completely sell out your work? Was that a complete surprise?
Certainly. Absolutely. I believe I've said this before that, I mean, in full honesty, if we had sold one painting, I would have been over the moon and completely excited and ecstatic. I was at that point an artist selling paintings on Canyon Road in Santa Fe. Yeah, blown away to this day that that was the outcome of that show. And to the credit of the gallery and how well they treat their artists and how they run things with, and how fairly they treat their artists and how well they run the gallery in terms of treating their clients as well.
Lastly, on this question, when you're doing a solo exhibition, did they give you a certain amount of pieces that you needed to hit to fill out the wall space, or do they kind of work with what you have? I'm just trying to picture, like, if you had a certain amount of pieces that you have at home,
Sure.
Did you have a certain target date you had to do more pieces, or did you already have those pieces ready to show?
No, you generally work towards a show. That show actually was probably within the first 6 months or so that I had been accepted to the gallery. And I certainly wasn't expecting to be offered a show. I basically just scrambled and worked as hard as I could to get as many paintings for that particular exhibition as I could. So I had just a mere months to create what I did. So in that case, it was kind of like whatever you can do. This time, I guess, letting the cat out of the bag a little bit, I do have a solo show coming up in August at the gallery. And we kind of nailed that date down about a month or two ago. So I've got 4 or 5 months, 6 months or something to work on that. And I'm already working on paintings for that show. And it's just such a luxury right now to be able to be working sort of in that long-term mindset, where I'm able to sort of have all of the paintings that I want to have for that show all lined up in my studio and be able to kind of evaluate them or bounce them off from each other and work on them all at the same time at some point, I imagine, as I get closer to the date, and just kind of trying to unify them, create a theme, making sure that they're all the same great quality. And yeah, to be working this way is really my ideal. I mean, if I could set a goal to have a solo show every year and know that that's coming up and work on those paintings for a whole year, that's magical. That's a really good place to be. In terms of how many paintings, basically, I spoke with Carlos and said, okay, where are we going to have this? Which rooms are we going to be in? And there was no specific number. It's just kind of like looking at the space and deciding how best to fill that space. So right now, starting on a couple of larger pieces and kind of get those out of the way first, because those are things that obviously they take more time, and the painting really needs to decide when it's done, not so much the timeline. Those are the items that I'm working on right now.
For people who are fans of your art, how do they particularly get one of your pieces? Can they commission a piece from you, or are you completely represented by our art gallery?
Through the art gallery, we do commissions, and they have been pretty frequent lately, and to the point where just recently received the go on another commission. So I think that's 3 that I've got going on right now. And that's going to be the last that I'm going to be able to accept until the show is over. And certainly I think right now, a lot of the shows that I mentioned, Coors, the National Cowboy, and the Albuquerque Museum, all of those shows are pretty much in the kind of the last quarter of the year. Certainly within the last half of the year. So I think timing is a good way to think about it as well. Like January and February, there aren't a whole lot of shows going on there, but that's a great opportunity to approach artists in terms of maybe getting commission from them, because they're both like maybe twiddling their thumbs because maybe paintings aren't moving as quickly during those months, but it's a great opportunity to reach out to one of your favorite artists and talk to them about a commission during that time. Because I think most of them
Gotcha.
would be very eager to do so.
While I was looking at your social media sites, from the outside looking in, it seems that you embrace everything about being an artist. Your work is on art galleries. You have a strong brand presence. It looks like you embrace and appreciate your other artists in your community. For you personally, Sean, what is the best part of being an artist?
My first inclination would be to say the freedom that it allows me. And what I mean by that is that I don't necessarily have a real set schedule. I mean, I certainly have sort of like long-term goals, but if something happens on a particular day where I'm not able to work on that particular element of that project, then I'm able to move over to something else. And that bleeds over into real life even. I think it's a balance to lifestyle that I really enjoy. And I will say this too. I would definitely consider myself an introvert. I'm not really especially outgoing in terms of meeting and engaging, but this has really taught me to do that and to appreciate both the gallery, of course, that's helping me to get to navigate this new world for me, and the collectors, and just the people that come into the gallery, the loop reviews and everything else like that. I've really learned to sort of grow as a person through being put into positions such as being the voice on a podcast, and just kind of saying yes and taking chances and putting myself in uncomfortable positions in order to be able to develop as a person.
I wanted to ask you this question because you mentioned this earlier, and it also makes sense why your social media presence and your website is so polished. You're also a graphic designer. Was there a crossroads where you asked yourself that you were going to leave graphic design behind and predominantly do art? Like, how did that come about?
I've always been artistic for as long as I can remember, always painting, always drawing. That includes elementary school and before. In my early 20s, I'm heavily engaged in painting and, I guess naively trying to become a famous artist. Moved out to Boston and San Francisco, and then had a moment where I realized that being an artist is hard. It's not the easiest thing to do. And so I made the decision to go to graphic design school because that was still an artistic endeavor that would allow me to make creative decisions, even on a moment-to-moment basis, an opportunity to work with color. I'm so grateful for the graphic design career that I had because it taught me the tools that I'm using now in terms of propelling my art career. But there was never a question upon entering the graphic design world that I would get back to fine art and be able to be that much stronger because of the tools that I learned in graphic design. And that includes, the use of color and shape and form and moving things on a two-dimensional surface, as well as the running of a business and the building of a brand. So through that process, there was always a pilot light somewhere in there that was going to get me back to a paintbrush. It was just a matter of timing, really, as to how and when that would happen. But there wasn't a light switch that went off. It's certainly been more of a transition to get there, both because, the design company that I worked there for well over a decade. And so I feel like an obligation to them as well. I don't want to certainly leave them high and dry, so to speak. But also it's a matter of feeling 1000% confident that paintings are going to get me to where I want to go. It's happened. So.
Okay. So we are coming to the end here. I just got several more questions for you, Sean.
Yeah.
And since when you graduated from Southwest University of Visual Arts, has your art career been everything you thought it would be? Has there been anything that surprised you about it?
I'm going to say no because of the fact that you get what you put into something. I know that I had a lot of peers with me going to graphic art school that didn't either finish their degree or end up using their degree to their advantages. You get what you put out of it. And I put a lot of effort into school, even though the curriculum wasn't necessarily the Ivy League, or anything close. But all I needed was that opportunity and shown and pointed the right direction. From there, it's a matter of getting your own resources, getting your own books, putting in your own time and making the best of the situation that you have. And so as a result, I've not had a day of work since I was working before I graduated. And that's just a work ethic.
What would you like to see happen in the future that hasn't happened with your career yet?
Well, I'd like to go ahead and build on the roster of museum shows that I do year round and kind of get that a little bit more balanced so that I'm not necessarily overloaded in that last quarter. And then I can kind of spread that out a little bit better throughout the year, just have a little bit more of an even pacing, and acquired into the permanent collections of some of our finer Western museums. And that would include, would be especially poignant to be placed in, New Mexico Museum of Art.
Is there any other artists or creatives that you would like us to know about that are out there that you particularly follow?
Sure. Let me think about that one a little bit. Names are not necessarily always my forte. There's a lot of them out there, of course, ones that kind of everyone knows within the genre that I'm painting in. Ed Mell, of course, is really amazing. Everybody is really, really, really loving Marco Maggiore. I mean, he's all over the place. Someone whose technique I really love quite a bit would be Glenn Dean. And I'm talking about all these really large kind of heavyweights that I think that if you're half an interest in Western art, you're going to be aware of. John Flaming, I think, is really good. He does some really interesting stuff that kind of a 2D kind of cut paper, kind of like a Monet in his later days and weeks sort of developed. Some non-Western would be like Mark Boges, who I follow. He is a landscape plein air painter, but I really just enjoy his technique and his line work and his color. And by subscribing to his email, you often get like little tips on what colors he's using and why he's using them, kind of giving you some scientific reasons in terms of how color and light works with the eye. David Casson is amazing. He's a portrait artist. He actually is in Albuquerque here. More Western, maybe Terry Kelly Moore's is great. There's so many. Luke Anderson.
Well, we'll definitely check some of those names out. And Sean, finally, how do you personally define success?
What is success for me? I'd have to reference one of my earlier answers, which is lifestyle, freedom, and just general happiness, and hopefully not at the expense of others. We live in a very complicated world. But for me to wake up in the morning and paint, and spend time with my family, eat good food, have a glass of wine, pet the dog, and go to bed smiling. For me, that's my success, to be happy.
Great answer. And Sean, thank you for sharing with us your awesome creative journey. And where can people connect with you again?
Of course, on my Instagram, that's probably the most active in terms of day-to-day or week-to-week update. From there, actually, and that's at SM Chavez Art on Instagram. If you click the link in the bio, that'll kind of take you to a link tree, basically, that allow you to do things like sign up for my newsletter. Doesn't go out too often. Link to the gallery, whatever shows might be happening at that time that you happen to visit, and at Acosta Strong Fine Art in Santa Fe, and then a few museum shows at various times of the year. Oh, and at my website at smchavezart.com or paintingsofthewest.com.
Thank you, Sean. Listeners, make sure to connect with him, and good luck on your upcoming show in August. And until next time, thank you and goodbye.
Chris, I really enjoyed speaking with you, and I'm thrilled to be on the show.
Thank you, Sean.